at the conference is the state tour. Cái một việc là tự quay của tự do.
All right, so I said I would introduce myself a little bit more. So again, me up the street, but the youth pastor there. I moved there in about August of 2021, so been there about 4 years. I will preface, just like to say this: I am not 20. I'm 31. Believe it or not. Now, next week, someone will be here who is actually in his 20s, but I am not. I'm 31. Been married for 9 years. Have 2 boys, and so we moved from grew up in Seattle, Washington, moved to Iowa for my first youth pastor job. Was there for about 2.5 years before we came down to Sarita, and we were so excited. I'll tell you what. And we had in our minds, right, my wife and she, we were like, yeah, we know exactly how this is going to look. We knew that what our plan was going to be, how things were going to work itself out. We were going to do this, we were going to do that. We like formed all these great plans, right? We had it all figured out exactly how God was going to use us in Sarita. But I don't know if you've ever heard this before, but there's a saying that goes, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. All right? And yeah, God laughed, all right? Because we moved there in August 2021, and life was good, the sun was shining, as it always is. My favorite part's living here. But then on May 2nd of 2022, so about 9 months after I moved there, I was on the way to church for staff meeting on Monday morning, and somebody was driving, not paying attention, didn't yield, pulled out and hit me on my motorcycle. I was about 50 miles per hour at the time. Absolutely just crushed the left side of my body. So I remember getting hit. I immediately hit the ground. And I remember thinking, like, 2 things came to my mind. The first one was, I think I might die. I couldn't breathe. I thought, like, I'm laying there and I'm thinking this is gonna be it. Then the second thing I thought was, man, my left leg does not feel like it's in the right spot. And so I ended up breaking my finger. My ribs were broken. I shattered. My shoulder fell on the left side, and then my left ankle got the absolute worst of it, just completely decimated my left ankle. Thankfully, they took me to Banner Medical Center, where they were checking me out, and somehow, by some miracle, while those things were serious, those things were real bad, I can tell you, the thing that was the miracle, somehow, in the midst of all that mangle on my left leg, they recognized that my aorta had been punctured. Now, they rushed me, I don't remember this at all, but they rushed me straight to surgery with the stent in my aorta. An absolute miracle that they even found it. Because if they didn't find it, I would have been dead from the ICU before I didn't fall asleep that night. And so it was a miracle that God saved me, and here I am, standing here, so thankful for all that. Look, some crazy things out of that. And then things kind of started to settle, right? I started to feel like I was walking somewhat normal. Sometimes people are still limping, and I don't notice that anymore, but for the most part, things were good, things were settling down, and hopefully life was getting back to normal. And then in October of the next year, 2023, so about whatever that math is, 15, 16 months after that, my son, was having some breathing problems, and so we weren't really sure kind of what was going on, and so we took him in to get him checked, and they found a lump in his chest, where sometimes kids have lumps, they just go away. We got the scan, and we found out that he had cancer on October 10th of 2023, right as things were settling in lymphoma. And so that has been the battle. And I was saying, I just wanted to at least make sure I clarified that my son is here this morning. He's in the kids' building, having a great time, I'm sure, with his older brother, and he'll be down in February. He'll be all done with all this. We've been since so. He is alive, thank goodness, but I can tell you that was one of the hardest times of my life. I thought the accident was going to be one of the hardest times of my life. And then I experienced watching my son go through cancer treatments, and the feeling of that was just something I'd never ever experienced in my life, and that I've never experienced. And while I've seen things work out in these unique ways, I'll be honest and tell you that there have been times where I've wondered, why? What is this happening in our life? And because I know intellectually that God is doing some amazing work, and He's always got a plan, and I've grown up in church and I do all these things, but I still wonder, is God really working this out for good? And I don't know where you're at in your life. And I will tell you that, like, sometimes we can start to compare our suffering with other people's suffering, and we can think, like, well, okay, mine's not that big of a deal, but that's not how that works. In fact, like, every trial is a trial, that we don't minimize trials because trials are hard trials. And so you might have found yourself in a trial at a time in your life, and you're like, this is tough. Boy, I've gone to church, and I remember, like, if God wants anything else, we could have those who love him, and like, know these things, and like, I know God has a plan, and I've seen how this all worked out. However, in this situation, when it hits my own life, we start to ask the question, like, well, is God really working this out in my good? What can God possibly be doing in this situation? What is taking God so long? But I can tell you in the last, 2 years or so, coming up on 2 years, even 3 years, I've wondered often, like, what could be coming out of this situation? And I'll tell you that I'm not the first person to ever feel this. In fact, historically, if you look back, I've been really excited that we've been in the book of Exodus, because the book of Exodus has some incredible things. And if you want to talk about a people who have experienced a time of suffering and probably asked themselves this very question, it would be the Israelites. You kicked off the book of Exodus last week. I know you guys did it. And so if you were here or you just know the story, just to kind of get a quick update, right? So in the end of the book of Genesis, you have Joseph, but Joseph goes into Egypt to be sold into slavery by his own brothers. And then what happens is he goes into Egypt and becomes provident. He's faithful to God, and God gives him this place. So Moses gets providence from God. God gives Moses these plans, so Moses executes. And in his wisdom, Moses said, I got the names mixed up. Joseph executes this plan, and he saves essentially in Egypt, but he also saves his own people, Israel, Jacob, his brothers come, they discover it, and it's all this amazing thing. And then we get to the beginning of the book of Exodus, and all of a sudden you start to find out that while Israel is living in Egypt and things are going well, they're growing, there's a new Pharaoh that arrives over Egypt who did not know Joseph. In verse 8. Now, when we say that he didn't know Joseph, the idea is not that he didn't know about who Joseph was. Everyone would have known in Egypt who Joseph was. Joseph was incredibly important. He essentially saved Egypt. They would have known who Joseph was. What means is that they didn't recognize Joseph. He didn't care about what Joseph did. All he cared about was retaining power. He started to worry. Oh, they're growing too fast. They're going to take us over. And so he starts putting in these stipulations where he overworks them. And then he starts to say, that's not enough. So then he makes them work as slaves at the primary job, and he starts to abuse them. Then he starts to say, they're still growing too fast because God is still blessing Israel, because he said, I'm going to make you faithful and you're going to multiply. God keeps blessing this. And so finally, the Pharaoh's like, that's it. We got to kill all the baby boys that are born right now. Genocide is the next thing that this Pharaoh decides to go for. And it's with this backdrop, right? It ends in chapter 1 with this idea that, like, the Pharaoh has now ordered everybody in Egypt to kill all the newborn baby boys and throw them in the Nile River. And this feels like, at this point, right, you read the story, and if you're existing and you're living here in Egypt at that time, where's the hope? We're God's chosen people. What is going on here? What is God doing here? I thought God was supposed to take care of us. But there's this little glimmer here that even if they don't know it yet, there's a little glimmer of hope that's about to take place. But I do want to at least preface that, like, before we get into any farther, that I think what we're going to realize today is that life to us is a lot of times like a puzzle. Let me explain. Okay? Have you guys all worked on a puzzle before, right? And so when you start it, you get think with a box. Well, I remember my grandma, she was a big space saver, so she would toss the box and just put it in bags, which did save space, but then as kids, when we would get the bag and dump the puzzle out, there was no reference point. So it would take, we would never finish the puzzle, right? I would show up at my grandma's house weeks later and it could still be putting the rest together. It would take us absolutely forever, but it was really challenging, and so we started to do it. But one thing about puzzles is that in the beginning, especially when you lay all the pieces out, it was I have no clue what this is supposed to make. Absolutely no idea. Like, you can see that there was like, okay, there's like a little bit of a shade of blue and red there, and like this is all one colors, and like it just didn't all fit together. What was great was that when you show back up the house, and she was pretty much that with it, she'd leave it out for us so you could see it and go like, oh, that's amazing. How did I not see that these pieces were going to fit together here in this movie, all in complete sense? And a lot of times in our life, what we do is that our life is in many ways this puzzle where like we get these little pieces and we can't see what's going on. We're like, this just looks completely random. There's nothing happening here. But what God does is he takes the puzzle pieces and he's putting them all together. God can see the whole picture. He sees exactly what it's supposed to look like, and he knows that this little piece here that seems insignificant, it seems like it doesn't matter, what it's going to do is it's going to connect and make sense. Because God takes difficult and seemingly unconnected phenomena and he brings that together to create something beautiful. This is what God does, and this is what God's going to do here in the book of Exodus. He's going to take things that just don't seem like they make any sense, like what a random detail this is. Why is this in there? What's happening here? And he creates something incredibly beautiful out of that picture. And so Exodus 2 starts with some really great news, even if they don't notice it. Exodus 2, 1-2 says, "Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived and gave birth to a son, and when she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months." So really quickly, I want to acknowledge that, like, this is not talking about Moses' like physical looks as far as like, it's not saying that Moses was not an ugly baby. I don't see babies for like, a lot of times they're not that beautiful. I love having children, but they're a little weird looking, just to be honest with you. So this is not what he's saying. He might have looked good out. I don't know what Moses looked like. What this is saying is that there was something unique off the get-go about Moses. In fact, if we go to Acts 7, to Stephen is talking about history, there's the New Testament, he's recalling Israelite history, and he records this about Moses. He says, at this time Moses was born, and he was beautiful to God, it says. And he was searching for 3 months in his father's home. And so what we're going to see is that, like Moses, there was something about his birth that was already just unique. This is not like an indictment on like, well, if he wasn't beautiful, other than here, just got rid of him. That's not what this is saying, but they want you to know, right? Moses Christ wants you to know that from the get-go, there was something unique about this baby. To both God and the parents, there was a plan that was done. We don't know exactly what that is, but there was something already happening here. And there we start to kind of see like this first puzzle piece, right? So there's little puzzle piece that right now we probably have no clue what that is. It just seems super random. But there's a puzzle piece that gets started here that God's like, I've got a plan, and he puts this little puzzle piece. There's this child that's born in she's unique, right? And we get this first puzzle piece as we're reading. Then in verse 3, the story continues. But when she could no longer hide him, she got on a papyrus basket and covered it with tar and pitch. Then she put the child in it and set it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. So mom here in a desperate move, right? She's like, I gotta save this child. And this was normal for the Israelites, by the way, right? Like they were disobeying Pharaoh's order. They could still multiply. But she's like, I can't hide this baby anymore. Like it's really hard to hide a 3-month-old baby. They cry a lot, make a lot of noise. So she recognizes, what do I do? So she puts them in this basket and she covers it with tar and pitch, which pitch, by the way, was used on the ark back in Genesis. Just a fun fact for you. And so she puts it in the reeds. And what that means is that it's out of the current of the river and hopes that like the baby Moses is just going to kind of stay amongst the reeds. And right now it seems like a weird plan. Like I have no idea what her thought was. Like, but then we read in verse 4, there's a little more that's happening to a prince. It says that his sister, whose name was Miriam, we know this because later on in scripture, which is not named here, his sister Miriam stood at a distance to find out what happened to him. So ultimately, right? Well, I don't think that Moses and mom knew exactly what was going to happen yet. She just thought there's something about this baby. There's something unique that God has. And so she says, Miriam, go out. I'm going to put the baby here. I don't know what's going to happen, but just watch and see. Just watch and wait. And it's like a Hail Mary, right? But mom's like, I don't know. There's a very slight, small chance that this baby can be saved. But I'm going to hope and I'm going to train because there's something special about it. So Miriam, just watch and see. And ultimately, there are probably about 99% of people who live in Egypt who are Egyptians at this point, where if they found that baby, that baby's dead. Because Pharaoh is an absolute psychopath. Okay, Pharaoh is somebody who's like so hungry for power that he decides he's going to commit genocide on baby boys. That's how firm he is about keeping and retaining the power that he has, and he's killing babies. This guy is an absolute lunatic. And nobody in Egypt is going to defy that man. Except maybe one. And if you're dad in here, you'll have a guess as to who the only person is who would dare defy Pharaoh. And that is in verse 5, now the daughter of Pharaoh. Yep. Only the daughter of Pharaoh would be willing to defy dad's orders. That's if she's the only one who could probably get away with it. So the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe the Nile with her female attendants walking alongside the Nile. And she saw the basket among the reeds and said to the slave woman, and she brought it to her. When she opened it, she saw the child. And behold, the boy was crying. And she had pity on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. Now, before I move and continue really quick, just a couple quick notes here. One, it's really interesting that she knows that it's a Hebrews child right away. So just in case somebody was like, well, maybe the Egyptians would have just like took the child themselves and tried to pass the child on as Egyptian. Apparently there was a very big distinction between Hebrew babies and Egyptian babies. And so that plan wasn't going to work. Somebody would have needed to basically bring in a Hebrew child and say, I'm going to keep him anyways. This was absolutely necessary. But then it says that she had pity on the baby. And what this is trying to say is that it's not just like she was like, oh, she felt bad. Like that was a part of it. But what that is, they're already acknowledging that pity has forced her to say, I'm gonna keep this baby. Like, there's no way I'm throwing this baby in the Nile. And so Miriam, who's watching from a distance, sees this right away. And it says, then Moses' sister Miriam said to Pharaoh's daughter, hey, shall we go and call one for you, who's nursing for the Hebrew woman, so that she may nurse the child for you? Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go ahead. So the girl went and called the child's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed him. A child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she named him Moses, and said, because I drew him out of the water. Incredible scenes here. All right, like so Mom thinks the baby in the reeds in the Nile River, Hail Mary time, right? Which ironically is exactly what Pharaoh asked her to do, technically. So she does that, right? And the only person who could find the baby and save it most likely is the daughter of Pharaoh. And she finds him, and she feels pity on him. So she takes Moses, and then not only that, then Miriam goes and she's like, hey, what if I have somebody to feed the baby for you? Because the princess can't feed the baby. She has to have a child with some offerings. And so she's like, oh yeah, sure, that makes sense. So who comes and gets to feed Moses? It's our mom. And she gets paid for it. She has to pay to feed her own child now. And so she does this, and then Moses gets taken into Egyptian household after this is all done, right? He grows up a little bit. And so what Moses is going to do is he'll learn in the Egyptian household, the same Egyptian household that later he's going to free the people from. He grows in knowledge in this household. This is all unbelievable here. And so again, we get many more pieces to this puzzle, right? It starts to like, it's still kind of confusing, but we can still be split, okay? But there's a little more coming here. So little more pieces being added to the puzzle of this situation. And there's one more thing that kind of like can hide under the radar. Because it says that she names him Moses because I drew him out of the water. Now what we don't know for sure is it would be actually a little unusual for an Egyptian woman to name her son something that meant something in Hebrew but not something in Egyptian. That would be a little bit confusing for her to do that. In Egyptian, Moses most likely means something like son, or the son of, right? So you've got this idea that like, okay, so Moses is the son, and then I'm sure there was some sort of idea, right, with the mom includes not, we don't know, but his name in Hebrew means to draw out, is where that verb of Moses comes from. He's to draw out. And so while right now, the mother draws Moses out of the water, what we're going to see is later on, Moses is going to draw his people out of Egypt. So the Egyptian mom names Moses a prophetic name, whether she probably didn't have any clue at all what she was doing. She names him a prophetic name that Moses is going to end up rescuing people out of Egypt. She had no clue. She, as an Egyptian, prophesied about Moses. In fact, if we go into the book of Isaiah, Isaiah writes in 63:11, then his people remembered the days of Moses, and they asked, where is he who brought them out of the sea with the shepherds of his flock? In other words, where is the one who freed people out of slavery? Moses has always been destined. God determined beforehand, even his name, exactly what Moses was going to do. He's going to save his people from slavery. He's going to save his people from oppression in Egypt. This is what Moses' purpose from the very beginning. So we get one weird puzzle piece, slowly but put together. Individually, these things don't seem like they're that big of a deal, right? Like if you were kind of sitting this moment, you'd be like you read this in a matter of a minute, 30 seconds, whatever, and so it all connects to us. But if you're there, it's not all making sense right away. And this is how things happen, is in real life. But things, you don't get to read things in hindsight in a matter of 30 seconds. Things happen in real time, and time takes a long time. But we can see already that God is doing something unique in this story. We've seen it over and over in chapter 1. Pharaoh, in his attempt to eliminate the Jewish people, God's like, no thanks, and he grows them more. Nothing is going to thwart God's plan. God has a plan, and no evil is going to thwart this plan. Pieces have already been being put together well before even we get to chapter 2. But here we get to see it start to come together a little bit. Now it continues in the narrative. We get to verse 11. Now it came about in those days, which whenever you read this, it doesn't mean like literal days. It just means like during that time frame when Moses had grown up. Now we know because like we lived historically, it's written out places. This was about 40 years. So from Exodus chapter 2, verse 10 to verse 11, 40 years passing basically. Now again, for us, that's like half a second. For the people suppressing in Israel, 40 years is a long time. 40 years is a long time to not feel like you're getting an answer from God. 40 years of suffering, of beatings, of oppression, of everything in the Pharaoh choice in 40 years. That's a long time. So it came about for 40 years. Now, realistically, there are many things that happened in this 40 years that we don't have before and for us, that do play a part in what God's going to do. There have been puzzle pieces that are getting put together, and we don't get to read about them. But God's been doing unique and incredible things throughout his time. Even Moses' 40 years, so he's been learning in Egypt. But then if we continue, right? So it came about, Moses had grown up 40 years, that he went out to his fellow Hebrews and looked at their hard laborers and saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his fellow Hebrews. Now the idea here is not that he was just like pushing him or like giving him a slap, or whatever. He was like beating him down. Like this is like a hard beating. This is something very serious. He sees like there's a potential that this guy could die. The idea here, when it's written, it's something very severe. And so we've seen this happening to one of his fellow Hebrews. So he looked this way and that. Then when he saw there was no one around, he struck and killed the Egyptian and hid his body in the sand. Now he went out the next day, and behold, 2 Hebrews were fighting with each other. And he said to the offender, why are you striking your companion? But he said, who made you a ruler and a judge over us? But you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Then Moses was afraid and said, surely the matter has become known. So Moses, even though he was raised in an Egyptian household, what we read again is in the book of Hebrews, is that like Moses, when he grew up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the temporary pleasures of sin. So Moses had this chance to he could have just stayed in the Egyptian household, things would have been fine, life would have been good. But he's a Hebrew. And he sees his own people suffering. And he feels like he has to take action. Something is happening and Moses cannot go without missing it. And so absolutely, Moses is going to know all the things about happening. So he goes and he does this, and he probably thinks to himself, I'm going to be a hero. They're going to look to me. I can be the one who can help these people out of Egypt. I've grown up in this household. I know all the ins and outs. I can save Egypt, or Israel, but that's not what happens. They don't see it. They criticize him. Moses is like, why are you beating up your own companion? Why are you doing this to your own friend? And you remember they're like, who made you a ruler and a judge over us? What are you going to do? Are you going to beat me like you beat that Egyptian? Are you going to kill me like you did that Egyptian? They miss it. They completely miss it. Again, when you go to the book of Acts, we see Stephen recounting the story. And what Stephen writes about this is he said, Moses, thought that his brothers understood that God was granting them deliverance through him, but they did not understand. This is not the first time Israel is going to miss their deliverer. This is going to happen many other times. That there is a chance where they can see there's a chance that can happen. This could start anything, right? This kind of moment could start momentum. This could start a revival. They could have jumped on Moses' side, but they miss it. In their pride, who are you? Why do we care who you are? You're not judge over us. And then that's their deliverer. Moses is hoping they're going to see it, but they don't. And now it's been spreading all over, right? It was like in high school when somebody was going to fight, and they're like, "Let's find out in school." And like initially, like 2 people did, but then by the end of the day, everybody in the school did. Nobody can keep secrets like that. And so everyone knows, right? And Moses knows, then everybody knows. And sometimes we kind of make this out to be like Moses acted impulsively, and then he was nervous about it, and so he buried the body. I don't think Moses was acting impulsively. I think Moses knew exactly what he was doing. Now, of course, he buried the body because he also knew exactly what he was doing. But Moses makes a choice. It doesn't work out for him here. But he makes a choice. And then you read this in the very next verse. When Pharaoh heard about this matter, he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from the presence of Pharaoh and settled in the land of Midian. And he sat down by a well. Now, typically we would read right over this, all right, because it's the minute detail, right, like this and stuff. But this is actually really important. So just, this is where Midian is, all right? I've got it right here. This is the general, so you can see Midian's down here, okay? I'll explain in a second. So this is like general Midian. Now, Midian, interestingly enough, I learned something new this week. Went to Bible college. Read it all the time. Somehow missed this. Did you know that Abraham had a second wife after Sarah died? Crazy. Anyways, so we did. I had no clue. And I was reading. So it says in Genesis 25, 1-2, there's only 2 verses. Now Abraham took another wife after the death of Sarah, whose name was Keturah. She bore to him Zimran, Jokshan, great names, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Now, these generations have all passed, right? But from Midian, the son of Midian, comes the Midianites. So they've got Abraham and lineage, not in the lineage of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So now the chosen people, not that lineage, but they've got lineage from Abraham. And so they've settled in Midian. So if we go back to the map here, this is where Moses squeezed to. So he goes from Egypt and he goes down into Midian, right? Somewhere in Midian. Now we're going to find out why that whole place is circled is because the wilderness of Midian, what happens is Moses is going to settle there, he's going to be there for a while, and the wilderness of Midian is like all over here, right? So like you travel the whole way across through there, you wouldn't just stick in there, because Moses actually has an experience later in Exodus 3 where he is at Mount Sinai, which is most likely somewhere down over there. So if you've been in the wilderness, this is where Moses is doing this stuff. Now it feels random. Like, okay, Gideon, who cares? Like, it was just how to refuge place for Moses. He just happened to be there. Like, he had to be there. He couldn't go to Egypt. It means nothing. But actually, there is more to this, because what's going to happen is he's going to lead people, spoiler, he's going to lead people out of Egypt, and they're going to settle right about, this is about where Sinai is. We don't officially know exactly which one is Sinai. That's why I say about. But it's calling this one. And then as they are with Moses, because if you guys remember, if you read further along in your Bible that the Israelites that walked through the desert, and God's like, I got a promise made for you. They're like, sounds great. Thanks for like doing all these basic things for me, God. And then they walk into the land, they're like, people are scary. And so they don't want to go in. So they're about this 40, they're going to wander for 40 years. And the places they're going to wander are basically right in that blue. That's around the area they're going to wander in the desert for years. So you know what's really fascinating? You know who's been spending 40 years there being a farmer? What? Moses! He's been farming in Midian for 40 years by the time he leaves and takes them out of Exodus. He would have been so familiar with the land. He would have known where the danger is, where the good stuff is, where the springs are, where the mountains are. He would have known all that because he's been wandering it as a farmer for 40 years. So when we get in the future, right? I won't be here, but when you guys get in the future, you start talking about the chapters where it's like, and they're wandering in the wilderness. You can think of this, that God has been placing and preparing us all before it. So again, just another piece of the puzzle, all right? Like, we're starting to add some more things. God's like working in these unique ways because what's going to happen, we kind of summarize here the next few verses, but what happens is Moses gets married, he has a son, and then he fulfills that 40 years. He built a life, which if you're doing your math, right, that's now 80 years before what we read in the beginning. So you've got 1526 BC where the birth of Moses happens. That's the beginning of chapter 2. And then by the time we get all the way to Exodus 3, which actually is a little bit more like Exodus 2, the later in Exodus, but yeah, I'll give you an idea. 1446 BC is 80 years. It's a long time. That's a long time for the people who were enslaved in Egypt. They're probably wondering, what's going on? What's happening? Life's been hard. Do you know the amount of death that probably happened, the amount of persecution, the amount of pain, the amount of babies that have died because of genocide, the amount of things that have happened in 80 years? There's a lot. It's been a lot. But chapter 2, you close with verse 23 to 25. Now it came about in the course of those many days that the king of Egypt died. Again, many days, just remember, it's not like literal days, just for at this time. And the sons of Israel groaned because of the bondage. And they cried out, and their cry for help because of their bondage ascended to God. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And God saw the sons of Israel and took notice of them. Now verses 24 to 25 are like the hinge verses of this chapter. If we go back just for a second, so sorry. This is like the hint here. So in the beginning, what's happened is that there's been a narrative of oppression, slavery. It's been tough. But then verses 24 and 25, there's like, it's going to shift all of a sudden to like it's been going down, things have not been good. And there's been little glimpses of overall, and then it's going to shift, and now you're going to see deliverance coming out of the rest of the book of Exodus. At least for the many chapters coming up, is that God's going to deliver Israel. But it hinges right here on 24 and 25. This is where the narrative is going to change. However, there's this implication when we read this, right? If you're reading it, says, God heard and remembered. Like, we have this, like, what do you mean God remembered? Like, did he forget? And God saw the sons of Israel, and God took notice of them. Like, when we read it, we can kind of get the sense of, like, oh, God totally forgot about Israel until they cried out for help. Well, that's not actually what's happening. A couple of things to know, we can go really deep into it, but ultimately, here's what we want to recognize. Is that this is not what's going on. God did not forget Israel. God did not forget his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that they would be fruitful, multiply, that they were his chosen people. God didn't forget any of that. God does not forget his covenant. He is the perfect covenant maker. He always remembers. And then in the end, when we see God took notice of them, really, when you look at the Hebrew of the verb, it actually should be God knew. Just a simple statement. God knew. And we're going to see that, like, throughout this, that God didn't remember. He knew. God's been seeing everything that's been happening in the midst of Israel and everything that's going on, and their oppression and their slavery and their pain and their suffering and their sorrow. And it says that God didn't remember it when they complained. God knew about it. He knew that it was happening. He'd been making a plan the whole time. He's been putting things together one after another because God knew. He knew what was going on. He had something beautiful that he was working on. Something that Israel is going to celebrate for the rest of their lives. God knew. And sometimes when we hit these times, we think like, what is going on? Like, Israel has to be wondering, like, what's happening? Where is God? Does he even care what's happening? God knew. Past, present, future. God knew. He knew. It's not about what is God's working, it's how God's working and what the picture of beauty is going to look like. And we start to get, again, now we get a lot of pieces. It's a little mixed up, and you've got a little bit of a sense of what's going on. You can start to see that things are happening. But when you put them together, when you start to see, like, there's a final result, when you put something together, then you get to see the final result, which was God was going to save his people out of Israel. They were going to walk through water. God was going to separate the walls of water to save Israel, and they were going to remember that for the rest of their history. We still talk about it today. There was something beautiful coming out of the pain and the suffering, and then God gave little glimpses here and there, but he knew the whole picture, and he knew exactly what was going to happen. I can tell you the last 3 years of my life, they have been confusing. I have had times where I don't know why God's put things in my life. I don't know why I had to get in an accident. As somebody who loved to play sports and loved to run around, it was tough. It's hard to know that my left leg is never ever going to be the same. I don't know why I had an experience watching my then 3-year-old son, and then 4, and then 5, deal with cancer and lose his hair and get needles poked to him. I don't always know the answer. Then I said that it was always easy, all the time, because intellectually I know God's got a plan. That's just not reality, so don't think that all the time, because emotions hit and real life things, and it's tough. But you know what? We get just little ellipses sometimes, and you may not think about it this way, but it is God's grace. God in his grace is here. Let me just give you a small portion of the picture. Let me just show you that through this experience, that your son now is going to have a stronger faith than most 3, 4, 5-year-olds ever know. I get to watch my son. When my oldest is scared, he gets to go to me and says, "Don't worry, I'm sure God is with you." You learn that from experience. I know that when he goes in and he gets his treatment all the time, when he has to get poked with the needle, is not port. Initially, he didn't have a port. They had to go in all the time. And it was absolutely terrible. But you know what song we chose every time? There's a song from PBS that says, "You do not have to fear because God is with you." And he plays it every single time. Every nurse knows that he's going to play that song. And you get these little glimpses of how God is really something incredible. And it doesn't mean that it's not hard in the time sometimes, but I can tell you one thing, that at the end of the day, I know that God is doing something amazing and miraculous, and I may not see it. I may not see it on this side of earth. I probably won't see every single way that this has impacted it, but I know that it's beautiful. I know that it's incredible. And ultimately, I am just blessed that I get to be a part of it. Because even though Moses, he's not going to get to see the promised land. He's going to do all these things, and he's going to lead them out of Egypt, and he's going to bring them the commandments, he's going to do all these incredible things. Moses does not get to see the promised land. But I can tell you what, it doesn't mean that Moses' sacrifice was useless. And it doesn't mean that Moses doesn't get to see the later result of what his work that God did in his life was. And she would rejoice. And so for us, what we get to know is, I don't know what you're going through right now. I don't know what pain you're experiencing. I don't know what struggles life has you in. But I can tell you one thing, If you will focus your mind on the little glimpses that God gives you, you'll make it through. Because God in His grace says, look, there's something I'm doing. If you'll just trust, and it's going to make something absolutely miraculous. But for now, He left it. Rico, keep fighting. Keep going. Because God has something incredibly amazing. And one day, we're going to look back on this, and when people write our story, if we see our story written out, they're going to look back, and at the end of our story, it's going to read, and God knew. He knew. He suffered with you. He laughed with you. He lived with you. But He knew that what you were going through, and He was making something. He does this all out of Scripture, all throughout it. We see that God is doing something. Who set the trust? God, we pray with you this morning. God, we thank you that you are a God who knows all. God, we know that at times that it can be hard to trust what you're actually doing. And yet, God, you know how hard it is. You can sympathize with this, God. You know the pain that we feel. You know what it's like. But God, I'd ask that we would just have people that come alongside us. You can encourage us, God, that we would be in your word, that we would be in prayer, that God, we would lean on you, because God, we thank you that you are God who has a perfect plan and mind. God, we're so thankful that you choose just regular human beings to be a part of your art. That we will look back down and see how incredible what you did in us, guys. Until then, God, we pray for supernatural patience. God, we pray for strength. And help us keep our focus on you. In your Son's name, amen? Yes.